It's a statistic that absolutely stops you in your tracks. In 2025, so just last year, Billboard put out their definitive data-crunching list of the greatest R&B artists of all time. And sitting right there at number 9, I mean, it's sandwiched between these legends who are universally beloved, figures you'd see on a postage stamp, is a man who is currently waking up every morning in a federal prison cell in North Carolina.
Inmate number 096200035, that's his designation.
Exactly. We are talking, of course, about Robert Sylvester Kelly, R. Kelly. And looking at that list, seeing that number 9 spot, it highlights this massive, really uncomfortable cognitive dissonance we are all living with right now.
It's unavoidable.
How does the industry and culture at large grapple with a figure who is undeniably a musical architect of the last 30 years?
Yeah.
I mean, someone who literally built the soundscape of the 90s and 2000s, but whose personal conduct was so heinous that he's effectively serving a life sentence.
It is the ultimate separation of art and artist test, isn't it? But with Kelly, and this is what we're going to find out today, it's not just about separation, it's about entanglement. When we reviewed the massive stack of source material for this deep dive, the court transcripts, the biographies, discography notes, the legal filings from as recently as June 2025, what really struck me is that you can't actually separate them.
But two sides of them.
Exactly. The trauma that created the predator is the exact same trauma that created the musical genius. They fuel each other. It's a closed loop.
That is what we need to unpack today. We aren't just doing a true crime timeline, and we aren't just doing a VH1 Behind the Music Greatest Hits review. We're trying to understand the machinery of this man. How did he happen? How did his system allow him to survive for so long? And, crucially, what is happening to him right now? Behind bars.
And those 2025 updates are so critical because they show that while the world might have, mutied R. Kelly, his story is very much active.
It's not over.
Not at all. He's petitioning the Supreme Court. He's having these medical emergencies that sound incredibly severe. This isn't a closed book by any stretch of the imagination.
So let's rewind. To understand the federal prisoner, we have to go back to the source. We have to go back to the south side of Chicago, January 8th, 1967.
Hyde Park. The Chicago Lying-in Hospital, that's where he was born. But, he didn't stay in Hyde Park. He was raised in the Bronzeville district, specifically in the Ida B. Wells homes.
And if you're not familiar with Chicago history, you really need to understand what Ida B. Wells was in the 1970s. This wasn't just housing.
Oh, not at all. It was a world unto itself. It was high density, high poverty, yes, but also this incredibly intense community bond. It was a place with its own rules, its own culture, its own dangers.
And his family dynamic was, well, the sources describe it as a study in absence and presence.
A powerful way to put it. His father was completely out of the picture. A total void. Kelly didn't even know who he was.
Which is an emptiness that shows up in the lyrics later on. You hear that searching for a father figure or this attempt to become the all-powerful patriarch he never had.
Constantly. It's all over his work. But the presence in the home was his mother, Joanne. She was a school teacher and a devout Baptist. And that a devout part is key.
The church.
The church was the center of gravity. Sunday service wasn't optional. It was the rhythm of life. But even there, Kelly describes a kind of duality in his mother. He actually called it a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde situation in his autobiography.
Right, I read that part. When she was there and focused, it was strict. It was love. But it was a very firm, structured love. But when she wasn't, that's when the darkness crept in. And we have to address the trauma immediately because according to his book, Solar Coaster, and corroborated by his brother Carrie, the abuse started incredibly young.
Between ages 8 and 14. And this is the part of the story that is so difficult to process, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to understand his psychological profile. He alleges he was sexually abused by an older female family member who was supposed to be babysitting him.
Which just flips the script on safety, doesn't it? The protector becomes the predator. And it creates this profound, deep-seated confusion about affection and violation, about love and power.
Precisely. And it wasn't a one-time thing. The sources say this was years of conditioning. Then you add to that an incident around age 10 with a male family friend. Kelly wrote that he was, and this is a quote, too afraid and too ashamed to speak.
So he internalized it.
He locked it away. He took all that confusion about sexuality and shame and secrecy, and he built a vault around it. He learned at a very formative age that sexuality is something you hide, something that is transactionally linked to power dynamics and control.
But there's another layer to this childhood trauma that isn't sexual, but it's deeply, deeply psychological. And honestly, this part of the research really stuck with me, the story of Lulu.
This one is haunting. It's the kind of thing that It breaks a child.
He was 8 years old.
Yeah.
Lulu was his girlfriend, or, as much of a girlfriend as an 8-year-old has. It was innocent. They were playing near a creek in the neighborhood.
And this is where the environment of the projects comes back in. It wasn't some idyllic, safe playground. Some older kids started a fight over the play area. It was chaotic. Violence just erupted.
And in the scuffle, Lulu got pushed. She fell into the water.
And it wasn't a calm stream. The current took her.
He watched her drown.
At 8 years old, he watched the water take the first person he ever loved outside his family. He cites this explicitly as his first musical inspiration. The grief unlocked something in him. He couldn't process it with words, so melody became the language for his pain.
It's so interesting you mentioned the water, because later in his career, water becomes this massive symbol. The storm is over. The constant rain in his videos, the baptismal imagery, it's always cleansing or dangerous. It's never just water.
It's a recurring motif, absolutely. But there was another trauma. Around age 13, he was shot.
Shot in the shoulder while riding his bike. Though I did see a conflicting account that it might have been self-inflicted.
Right, the story is murky, which is also a theme with him. But either way, a young teenager getting shot, it just adds another layer of violence and chaos to his formative years. So the immediate release valve for all this, the abuse, the grief, the poverty, the violence, was the subway.
The L tracks.
Specifically, the Jackson station on the Red Line. You have to picture it. A teenage Robert Kelly standing on that platform under those tracks. The trains are deafening. The screech of steel on steel.
To be heard over that, you have to project. You have power in your voice.
He wasn't just singing for fun. He was busking. He was hustling for loose change. It was survival.
His first stage.
It was his training ground. He learned how to capture an audience that was actively trying to ignore him. He learned how to make people stop in their tracks. But, raw talent in a subway tunnel usually stays in the subway tunnel unless someone comes along to refine it. That's where Lena McLin enters the narrative.
The music teacher at Kenwood Academy.
Right.
Every great artist seems to have that one teacher, that one mentor who intervenes at the exact right moment.
McCarlin was that figure for him. She didn't just teach him scales. The sources say she acted as a surrogate mother figure. She saw the pain, but she also saw the immense raw talent, and she pushed him. There's the famous Stevie Wonder moment the sources always mention.
Right. She basically forced him to perform Ribbon in the Sky at a high school talent show.
And he was terrified. We think of R. Kelly as this swaggering, hyper-confident superstar, but back then, he was painfully shy. He wore sunglasses on stage because he couldn't make eye contact with the crowd. The story goes he had to be physically escorted to the microphone.
But when he opened his mouth?
The room just stopped. He won first prize. And you have to imagine what that felt like. It was the first time he got validation for his voice rather than feeling shame for his secrets.
But there's a technical detail about his time at Kenwood that I want to drill down on because I think it explains the sound of R. Kelly more than anything else. The sources mention he was diagnosed with dyslexia.
Yes. And we need to be clear. This wasn't mild dyslexia. He was, for all intents and purposes, functionally unable to read or write text. And critically, he couldn't read or write standard musical notation.
So how does a guy who can't read music become one of the most prolific songwriters in history? I mean, we're talking about thousands and thousands of songs.
By developing a completely different cognitive process. He didn't learn music. He felt it. He described it as visualizing the music. He wouldn't look at a staff and see notes. He would hear the full arrangement in his head, the drums, the bass, the harmonies, the vocal stacks, and he had to record from the gut.
It's almost like the disability forced a workaround that became his superpower.
That's a perfect way to describe it. Because he couldn't write it down, he had to make it catchy enough to remember. That's why his hooks are so sticky. That's why the melodies are so repetitive and almost like chants. He was composing from memory, not for the page. He was following the feeling rather than the formal rules of composition.
Which makes total sense. So he drops out of high school because, let's be honest, the academic system wasn't built for someone like him, and he forms the group MGM.
Musically gifted men.
Right. And they get their big shot on a TV show called Big Break.
Which was basically American Idol or The Voice before any of those existed. It was hosted by Natalie Cole. They went on and performed a song called All My Love, which is actually the demo that later became She's Got That Vibe. And they won the grand prize, $100,000.
And in the late 80s, for a kid from the Ida B. Wells homes, $100,000. I mean, that's not just life-changing. That is a staggering amount of money.
It was the ticket out. It was proof of concept. That win led directly to the contract with Jive Records in 1991. And that, well, That launches us into the era that defined the 90s. We are entering Section 2, the ascent of the king.
And it starts with the New Jack Swing era. If you listen to that first album with his group public announcement, Born into the 90s, it's very of its time.
Oh, very much so. Hits like, She's Got That Vibe, Honey Love. It's upbeat, it's danceable. It sounds a lot like Teddy Riley or Guy or Bobby Brown.
It fits right in. But it's clear he wasn't content with that.
No, you can tell Kelly clearly wanted more than just to be the frontman of a dance group. He wanted the throne. He separated from the group pretty quickly. And in 1993, with the release of his first solo album, 12 Play, he didn't just ask for the throne, he took it.
This is the pivotal moment. This is where he creates the persona that would make him rich and eventually infamous. The R&B thug.
And we should define that term R&B thug, because I think modern listeners might take it for granted. Before R. Kelly, mainstream R&B was, well, it was Luther Vandross, it was Freddie Jackson, it was smooth.
It was suits and ties, it was romance, it was begging for love on bended knee.
Exactly. It was polite, it was courtship. Kelly looked at what was happening in hip-hop, the aggression, the explicit sexuality, the street aesthetic of NWA or Dr. Dre, and he dragged it, kicking and screaming, into R&B. Bump and grind isn't asking for permission, it's a demand.
My mind's telling me no.
But my body's telling me yes.
That opening line alone, that is the thesis statement for his entire life, his entire career.
It really is. It's the conflict between conscience and impulse played out over a slow jam beat. And the public absolutely ate it up. Bump and Grind spent a then record-breaking 12 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot R&B Singles Chart. It established him as the dominant force.
But what really shows his genius, and again, I'm using that word strictly in terms of his musical capability, is what he was doing for other people at the exact same time. He wasn't just in his own lane.
Oh, he was the whole highway.
Yeah.
The production credits from this era are just staggering. He wasn't just making these sex songs for himself. He became the industry's secret weapon, the go-to hitmaker.
The Michael Jackson connection is still mind-blowing to me.
1995, You Are Not Alone. R. Kelly wrote and produced that song. It holds a Guinness World Record. The first song to ever debut at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Just think about that. A kid from the Ida B. Wells homes who can't read music wrote a #1 debut for the undisputed king of pop.
And it's such a vulnerable, pure, almost gospel-inflected song. And then you realize it came from the same brain that wrote Sex Me Part 2.
It's the Madonna whore complex translated into sheet music. He could channel the sacred and the profane with equal conviction and seemingly equal sincerity. He did it for Whitney Houston. He did it for Toni Braxton. He'd do it for Celine Dion with I'm Your Angel.
And he did it for Aaliyah.
Which is the dark heart beating at the center of this entire era. We have to touch on this now. He produced her debut album, Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. And we know now, thanks to the legal proceedings and the documentation that has come out, that this was not just a mentorship.
The illegal marriage in 1994, the certificate was forged. She was 15 years old. He was 27.
It set the pattern. It showed that he was using his position as a producer, the gatekeeper of fame, the dream maker, to access and groom young girls. And the album title? Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. Looking back, it feels like he was taunting the public, hiding in plain sight.
But the industry just looked the other way.
Yeah.
The hits were undeniable, the machinery kept moving, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was bigger than what happened in 1996, Space Jam.
I believe I can fly.
You cannot overstate how ubiquitous this song was. If you were alive in 1996 or 1997, you heard this song every single day. It was at weddings, funerals, graduations, kindergarten recitals.
Corporate motivational seminars.
Everywhere.
It won 3 Grammys. And it signaled a shift in Kelly's own mind, I think. He started to see himself not just as an R&B singer, but as a messenger, a spiritual vessel. He was bridging that gap between the club and the church. He was telling the listener, I can be a sinner, but I can also be a saint. And for a long time, the public allowed it.
Which brings us to possibly the most bizarre manifestation of his I can do anything attitude from that period.
Yeah.
The basketball career. I feel like this is a fever dream, but the sources confirm it's real.
Laughs. I had to triple check this in the notes myself. 1997, the Atlantic City Seagulls of the United States Basketball League.
This wasn't a celebrity charity game where he played for 10 minutes and took a few photos?
No, this was the USBL, a legitimate professional league, one step below the NBA. He signed a contract. He played in games under his own name. He wore jersey number 12, obviously honoring 12 play.
Of course he did.
And by all accounts, he wasn't terrible. The team's owner, Ken Gross, insisted it wasn't a gimmick, that Kelly could actually play.
But the best part, the most R. Kelly part of this whole story, is the contract clause.
The Whitney Houston clause,
Yeah, I
essentially.
am about this. It's incredible.
He had a clause written into his professional sports contract that said if he needed to perform a musical obligation, he could leave the team immediately, no questions asked. So theoretically, you could be in the fourth quarter of a tight game, and Kelly could just say, sorry, coach, Celine Dion needs a bridge for her new single, and he'd just walk off the court.
It's funny, but it's also a symptom, isn't it? It shows a man who has never been told no, a man who believes he is the center of every universe he occupies.
Absolutely. It's the behavior of someone who believes he creates his own reality. He wanted to be an NBA player. He bought his way into being one. He wanted to be the king of R&B. He took it. And for a long, long time, that reality held up. But as we move into the 2000s, into section 3 of our timeline, that reality starts to fracture.
The hits continue, but the chaos, it just ramps up.
Right.
We enter the TP2.com era in 2000. He's reclaiming the R&B throne after a brief quiet period, but then comes the collaboration with Jay-Z. The best of both worlds in 2002. On paper, this should have been the greatest tour of all time.
A cultural event.
You have the king of R&B and the king of hip-hop, both at the peak of their powers.
It should have been a victory lap for both of them. Instead, it was a complete and utter train wreck. The egos involved were just massive. There was constant tension regarding billing, the lighting, who came out on stage when. You have to remember, Jay-Z is a very precise, business-minded operator.
A chess player.
Exactly. And R. Kelly is not. Kelly is improvisational, emotional, erratic. It was oil and water.
And it all just exploded at Madison Square Garden. The infamous pepper spray incident.
This is legendary music industry dysfunction. Kelly claimed that a member of Jay-Z's entourage, Tyron Ty Smith, pepper sprayed him backstage. Kelly leaves the show, the tour implodes.
And then he sues.
He sues Jay-Z and the promoters for $75 million, claiming the environment was unsafe and he couldn't perform.
$75 million.
Yeah.
He really thought he could just sue his way out of a bad vibe on tour.
The suit was eventually dismissed, but it marked the end of that partnership. A very public, very bizarre feud. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, is as bizarre as what Kelly released starting in 2005.
We have to talk about Trapped in the Closet.
We must,
Yeah.
because it's a cultural artifact that really, it opens a window into his mind like nothing else.
It was described as a hip opera, which is a term.
Slips. It's a musical soap opera. It started with 5 chapters on the album TP.3 Reloaded, and it just kept going and going for dozens of chapters.
Yeah.
It demonstrated his storytelling ambition, but also his profound eccentricity. It's this winding, ridiculous narrative about infidelity, secrets, a midget in a cabinet, a policeman, a pastor. It's completely surreal.
It really is. And it became this huge cult classic. People were having viewing parties for the new video chapters. It showed that he was still willing to take these massive creative risks. But looking back, doesn't it also show a man who was living in a very isolated, weird world of his own creation?
It does. The title itself, Trapped in the Closet, is so loaded. It's all about secrets. It's about people hiding who they are. It's about the chaos that ensues when everyone in the room is lying. That was the world R. Kelly was building around himself in real life.
He also released Happy People, You Save Me in 2004, a double album. One disc was upbeat, Happy Steppers music for the cookouts, and the other disc was pure gospel.
Again, that duality, he was literally packaging it for you. He was telling us who he was. A man torn between the spirit and the flesh, between Saturday night and Sunday morning.
But while all this music was dominating, there was a dark cloud that had been hovering since the 90s. And this brings us to section 4, the legal history. And we need to be very precise here because people often conflate the timelines and the different cases.
Right. It's important to separate the accusations from the charges from the convictions. They are not all the same thing.
So the shadows were there early. We mentioned the marriage to Aaliyah in 1994. That was the first major public red flag. Then there was the Tiffany Hawkins lawsuit in the late 90s, another accusation from a minor, which was settled out of court.
Money made it go away. That was the playbook for a long time.
But the legal inflection point, the moment where it felt like his career might actually end for the first time, was the 2002 videotape scandal.
This was the tape that was anonymously sent to the Chicago Sun-Times, allegedly showing Kelly with an underage girl. This led to his indictment on multiple counts of child pornography. This wasn't a civil suit. This was criminal. This was the state of Illinois versus Robert Kelly. This was facing serious prison time.
And yet he kept working. The legal battle dragged on for 6 years. 6 years of delays, motions, legal maneuvering. Finally, in 2008, he went to trial. And this is the part that many people forget or just don't understand. He was acquitted. on all charges.
And we really need to explain how that happened because looking back from 2026, it seems impossible. The sources point directly to the effectiveness of the little man defense.
Break that down for us. What exactly is the little man defense?
It was a brilliant, if morally questionable strategy used by his defense attorney at the time, Ed Genson. They didn't necessarily argue that the act on the tape was okay or that the tape was fake. They argued that you couldn't prove who was on the tape.
They attack the identification.
Exactly. They brought in so-called experts to analyze body markers, moles, the shadows in the room. They argued that the girl couldn't be definitively identified as the specific underage victim named in the indictment. They sowed just enough reasonable doubt about the identity of the participants.
So it wasn't, I didn't do it. It was, you can't prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that it's me or her on that grainy video.
Precisely. And in a pre-HD, pre-ubiquitous social media tracking era, it worked. The jury acquitted him, and because of that acquittal, his career rebounded in a way that is just shocking to consider now.
The industry took that verdict as a green light.
They took it as absolution. They said, well, the court of law said he's not guilty, so let's get back to business. 2 years after that trial, he performed at the 2010 FIFA World Cup opening ceremony in South Africa.
That is just wild to think about. He was on the biggest world stage imaginable just 2 years after a child pornography trial. It really speaks to the power of a hit record and the willingness of the public to look the other way.
It speaks to the power of the separating art from artist argument and how for a very long time people were willing to make that separation as long as the music was good. But that all changed in 2019.
Surviving R. Kelly, the documentary series.
That was the reckoning. That was the cultural shift. It amplified the voices of the victims in a way that couldn't be ignored any longer. It wasn't about legal arguments or grainy tapes. It was about human stories. It was parents talking about their brainwashed daughters. It was women recounting in graphic detail the abuse they suffered.
And the culture had changed, too. The hashtag #MeToo movement had happened. The collective tolerance for this kind of behavior had just, it had evaporated.
The impact was immediate and seismic. RCA Records, his lifelong label, finally dropped him. Law enforcement in multiple jurisdictions opened new investigations based on the testimony in the documentary. And we saw the rise of the hashtag #MeterKelly campaign, a grassroots effort to get his music off radio and streaming playlists.
And Kelly's response to this tidal wave was, well, it was characteristically defiant. He released a song called I Admit in 2018, just before the documentary.
I remember this. A sprawling 19-minute track. It felt like a fever dream listening to it.
It's a fascinating psychological document.
Ugh.
Because the chorus repeats, I admit it, I did it, which on the surface sounds like a full confession.
Right. But you have to actually listen to the verses. What is he admitting to? He's admitting to adultery. He's admitting to being a dog, his word. Yep. He's admitting to sins in a general biblical sense. But he explicitly, forcefully denies the pedophilia and the non-consensual acts.
He calls out his accusers by name. He denies the sex cult claims, calling them stupid.
He's trying to reframe the entire narrative. He's saying, yes, I'm a sinner, but I'm not a monster. I'm not a criminal. And then there's that line, only God can mute me. It was pure defiance. It was the Pied Piper refusing to put down the flute.
But defiance didn't work in a federal court of law this time.
No. The federal government stepped in, using racketeering laws, the R&amp Act, to paint a picture of a long-running criminal enterprise. In 2021, he was convicted in New York for racketeering and sex trafficking violations of the Mann Act. Then in 2022, a separate trial, he was convicted in Chicago for producing child pornography and enticement of a minor.
The sentences were heavy. They were structured to be served consecutively in some parts, concurrent in others, but the grand total comes out to roughly 31 years.
Which, for a man in his mid-50s at the time of sentencing, is effectively a life sentence.
And the fallout was swift. Awards started getting pulled back. The key to the city of Baton Rouge was officially rescinded. But here's where it gets really interesting regarding the Grammys. The Recording Academy made a statement that they would not be stripping him of his 3 awards.
That's a very controversial stance.
What was their logic?
Their logic, publicly, was that the awards recognized the art that was created and judged at that specific moment in time, and that history shouldn't be rewritten or erased. They argue that I Believe I Can Fly was judged to be the best R&B song of 1997, regardless of what the writer did 20 years later. It's a purist argument that really doubles down on the separation of art and artist.
It's a debate that will probably never be settled. Which brings us to the present day, Section 5. Recent developments. We are looking at sources up to and including 2025. R. Kelly is currently incarcerated at FCI Butner Medium in North Carolina.
And he is not going quietly into that good night. In 2024, reports surfaced that Kelly and his lawyer, Jennifer Bonjean, had petitioned the United States Supreme Court to review the Chicago child pornography case.
Wow. All the way to the Supreme Court.
They are arguing for a review that could, they hope, potentially knock 20 years off his sentence. It's a huge legal long shot, a real Hail Mary, but it shows they are still fighting.
But aside from the legal maneuvering, there was a major health scare just recently, in June of 2025.
This is a very serious incident that highlights the grim reality of his life now. On June 13th, 2025, Kelly was rushed from the prison to a hospital following what was described as an apparent overdose or medical emergency.
And the details from the attorneys are pretty alarming. They claim he was placed in solitary confinement on June 10th, given anxiety medication, and then the dosage was increased. They say he got dizzy, lost his vision, and collapsed in his cell.
And when he got to Duke University Hospital, reports from his legal team indicated he was diagnosed with blood clots in his lungs and legs. That is life-threatening. A pulmonary embolism is no joke.
And yet he was returned to prison on June 15th, apparently against medical advice. His lawyers immediately filed emergency motions citing mistreatment and a lack of proper care. It really paints a picture of a desperate, chaotic situation inside FCI Butner.
It's a long, long way from the VIP section of the club, from charter jets and sold-out arenas.
It is. It shows that while the music world has moved on, the human drama of R. Kelly's life is still very much active and volatile. Which leads us to the big, thorny question in our final section, Section 6, the artistry and legacy. How do we process all of this? We have to talk about the music itself, stripped of the context for just a second to understand why he was so big in the first place.
Musically, he was a bridge. He was a conduit. He connected the old-school soul of his heroes, Donny Hathaway, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, with the new, aggressive hip-hop aesthetic. He brought the church to the club and the club to the bedroom.
The church to the club. That's a perfect way to put it.
His method was unique, too. Because of the dyslexia we mentioned, he recorded from the gut. It was all improvisational. He felt the music rather than reading it. And he had this uncanny ability to write songs that felt completely universal. I Believe I Can Fly is a global anthem. Ignition, remix, is to this day a party staple.
And then there's the nickname he gave himself, the Pied Piper of R&B.
In hindsight, that moniker is just...
Yeah.
It's chilling.
Yeah. Originally, it was meant to mean he was leading people to the music, right? Like everyone follows him to the dance floor when the song comes on.
Exactly. It was about charisma and influence. But now, when you view it through the lens of the grooming allegations and the convictions, the Pied Piper reads as a man luring children away from their homes with a captivating song. It's a grim, grim irony that he chose that name for himself. It feels like a confession he made decades before he was caught.
And yet, despite all of this, the convictions, the 31-year prison sentence, the chilling nicknames, the documentaries, we come back to where we started this conversation. Billboard magazine ranked him the #9 greatest R&B artist of all time in 2025.
That ranking is the crux of the entire legacy problem. The music industry cannot erase the statistics. It can't pretend he didn't exist. He sold over 75 million records worldwide. He wrote and produced hundreds of hits for himself and others. He defined the sound of R&B for 2 decades.
You cannot tell the story of modern R&B without R. Kelly.
You can't. The foundation of so much modern R&B and even pop is built on his production style, his vocal arrangements. But you also cannot tell his story without the abuse, without the crimes, without the victims. The two are inextricably linked.
It's the ultimate test of separating art from artists. Can you? And perhaps more importantly, should you?
It's become a deeply personal question for every listener, hasn't it? For some, hearing Ignition remix at a wedding is just nostalgia. They hear the bounce, they remember the party, and they can make that separation. For others, it's an endorsement of a predator. They hear the voice of a man who hurt children, and it's impossible to ignore. The music remains embedded in the culture, even if the man himself has been muted.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what we're left with is this profoundly tragic trajectory. A prodigy born into poverty and trauma on the south side of Chicago. A boy who watched his first love drown and found his voice in the subway tunnels. A man who conquered the music world, wrote hits for Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston, and then used that immense power and status to exploit and abuse the most vulnerable among his fans.
And now, he sits in a cell in North Carolina, his health failing, his reputation in absolute tatters, while his songs still play on the radio somewhere in the world at this very moment.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought. Think about that I Admit song, and think about that 2025 Billboard ranking.
Mhm.
In this digital age where everything is archived and accessible, can we ever truly delete a legacy that was this influential, this deeply woven into the fabric of our culture? Or does the music itself serve as a permanent, uncomfortable artifact of the era that created and enabled him? Is the music a monument to his talent, or is it evidence of our complicity?
It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, but it's one we absolutely have to keep asking.
Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.